Hello everybody, welcome to the patch 13.3 rundown for amateur play. My name is Quintic, and today I'll be using my system of predictive criteria that I've been developing to help me assess the probable impact of the patch on all levels of amateur competition, with a particular focus on the underserved, platinum, and below. Now, keep in mind that although each change will have an impact on the power level of a champion, we're mostly looking at systemic changes and very major champion changes. Otherwise, even when a champion will have like a small dip in win rate in solo queue, we may be assessing them as virtually unchanged in amateur play, because at the end of the day, you should try to play your comfort as often as possible in lower levels of play. And just like small damage nerfs and something like that shouldn't be changing that, right? If you're watching this roughly a week after release, please check the comments below as I reflect on the patch and just make sure that everything I said was accurate. Okay, so starting with Aurelion Sol, I'm not going to go into depth. I've just put out Day 1 Aurelion Sol, my guide, how to get started with him. I don't tend to make like power assessments on brand new champions, in the guide at least, but like I do have a strong feeling that if we can bypass Aurelion Sol's vulnerable, volatile laning, that he's just going to be an absolute monster, right? Like I think he definitely appears to be very high power, and we're going to have to try to figure out like what exactly his place in the game is, although I think we have a pretty good start from that video. Please check it out if you haven't. Right. Amumu. So Amumu, they say he's too strong in both jungle and supports, and even so, like jungle, it still kind of makes me giggle. It's like, how can Amumu possibly be too good in jungle, right? So they're increasing Amumu's Q cost by 5, and they are decreasing his E damage by 15 at rank 1, but it scales up to +5 at rank 5, and so the intention here is clearly to reduce his ability to continually all-in you in bot lane, and it's to slow his early clear speed. Now, jungle Amumu is not something that I've ever really properly explored. I just kind of left it at, oh, his clear is super unhealthy and very exploitable. Which actually, now that I think about it, makes him very good in like platinum and below, where junglers don't tend to invade without very obvious prio. Interesting. So, I mean, historically, when Amumu's mana costs have gone up, I really don't think it made a significant difference. Like, when you think back to, I think it was like Season 11 Worlds where Amumu got picked up a lot for the first time, and then got dropped and then got nerfed. I don't believe that Amumu's Q cost had anything to do with the reason that he got dropped in that season. So I, just from like historical experience with this, how much mana does Amumu need to all-in you truly, and how often is he all-inning you? Like, it's really, at most, twice in a laning sequence, right? As long as he's actually not missing his Qs spontaneously, right? So if Amumu is playing properly and like exerting pressure correctly, I don't think this makes any significant difference, and because this is a clear speed nerf, I don't think that matters for most lower levels of play at all, and I would just like, expectation is like no change on Amumu at all, not even a little bit. Okay, Annie is getting, I read this on Twitter a while ago, Annie is getting like a bunch of quality of life changes. So what are they doing to her? Annie will now spawn with her passive fully charged on game start and when she respawns. That's huge for level 1 implications, right? Shield strength is going up at level 1 and the AP ratio is going up dramatically. The cooldown is going down. The retaliation magic damage is going up at all ranks with an increase in AP ratio. When Molten Shield is active, enemies whose basic attacks hit the shield, that's how it used to work. Enemies whose basic attacks and spells, wow! But it only inflicts damage against opponents once per target per shield, and Tibbers' shield counts as a new shield. Okay. Tibbers' health now has an AP ratio. Ooh! Tibbers' resistances now have a small AP ratio. Tibbers' move speed now scales with level, which is big because like Daisy is still faster than this at like rank 1. Right. Okay, that's a bunch of changes to Annie. That's a lot of quality of life. So let's take this one step at a time, right? None of this is really Annie's damage. It's only like, yeah, because now even though the shield damage appears stronger and is easier to proc and is stronger in lane, the opportunity to proc it multiple times is gone, but realistically, how many times with this shield value, especially since you're usually leveling it last, how many times are you realistically proccing it more than once, right? So this, in most situations, is just a damage increase, right? So we have to talk about several things. We have to talk about regular Burst Mage Annie, we have to talk about Rylai's Liandry's Annie, and we have to talk about Support Annie, okay? This also buffs Support Annie. This change here, you can enter lane and you don't have to stack your Q, and you do have the opportunity to just take a trade at earlier levels and, like, use your level 2. Annie can use her level 2 if she's able to use her auto attack range. So that's immediately power impacting for Annie support. Burst Mage Annie is not getting any love whatsoever here. Like, okay, realistically, there's, like, a tiny, tiny bit of love, but the retaliation magic damage of Molten Shield is not part of her combo. And Burst Mage Annie is definitely the style that struggles the most in a post-durability update world. And that is definitely kind of challenging. Tibbers surviving noticeably longer because his health now has a 75% AP ratio, and Tibbers reflecting more damage because he's, like, one of the only sources of double procs of Molten Shield. That actually implies that Rylai's Liandry Annie is just, like, genuinely strong. And yeah, as we're saying in the chat, like, Tibbers is a very strong pet with a lot of AP scalings. He's exerting a lot of threat even post-burst combo, right? I was about to say, like, this wouldn't appear to do very much for laning, but, like, just this alone against mages makes Annie, like, more threatening in every matchup. This is actually, like, a tremendous swing against spells now. You fire a spell at Annie, and not only is she not taking as much damage, but, like, you are just taking the retaliation damage on, like, your Syndra Q or something like that, right? On Syndra Q. That's insane. Either way, I'm not going to waste my time speculating on, like, everything. My gut instinct says this is insane. A lot of good properties here. And I really do want to reassess Annie in both of her primary roles. Because I think, like, we're actually going to find value in running Annie again. Jarvan IV. Okay, so Jarvan, I'm not even going to read their context. The big problem with Jarvan is that his builds in Season 13 suck. They're so bad. Jarvan, like, had a place in Season 12, even post-durability update, because, like, he had pure tank builds that actually outputted meaningful damage, and that made him threatening. He had access to Chem Tank, he had access to Sunfire, and that was all appealing. But, like, now what has he got for tank itemization? Like, you're not gaining value as Jarvan from Jack Show necessarily, especially as a rush, because, like, you are a champion who has to output some damage to justify your existence. So it looks like what they're trying to do, +2 base armor, shorter cooldown on Aegis, an 80% bonus AD ratio on the shield, and a shorter duration. So they're trying to reward Jarvan with more durability for opting into more damage to account for the current landscape of the game, right? And I guess Jarvan would be, like, one of the only champions in the universe who, like, actually kind of likes Gore Drinker's new Mythic passive. That's not a factor. No, that's not a factor, because you're, like, a 2-item champion at most. Durability is not output, durability is a gate. And so Jarvan receiving more durability would be power impacting if it would make him more able to provide output, right? It would make him more able to provide additional CC, and it would make him more able to provide additional damage. At the end of the day, that is, like, a plus, like, just rounding, like, 45 shield, something like that, on his Gore Drinker. I think this looks greater than it is. And the funniest possible outcome is lethality Jarvan becoming a bigger problem. That's the funniest possible outcome, and that's actually, like, the most likely outcome from this change, is lethality Jarvan is the one that gets buffed the most. But for general play Jarvan, I wouldn't read too deeply into this. It's plus 25 effective HP at level 11. It's such a marginal change on base stats alone. And so I would not get misled by this. I don't think it is a significant buff to Jarvan at all. Right. K'Sante is getting a big suite of nerfs. He is gaining more HP, like some more health growth. In exchange, the knock-up duration on Q3 is noticeably shorter, and the stun duration is shorter. So this is the part that's affected by Tenacity and the part that isn't. The minimum stun duration of Pathmaker, so just the tap Ws, that's lower. And the resistances lost are huge. Now, Tofo strikes, like, the slow isn't factored in. This is really just a nerf that's intended to hit all-out state, where you have less CC when you're all-out. You're noticeably squishier when you're all-out, and truthfully, I don't think this makes a very significant difference, like the minimum stun duration on Pathmaker. I do think K'Sante is closer to balanced than people would think even prior to these changes. The big problem is just like when he goes all out, he is shockingly unkillable. I think because he's going to become noticeably squishier, we should probably see a K'Sante that's a lot more in lines with my predictions in day one K'Sante, where he is absolutely like not the kind of champion you just blind pick because he's an overwhelming stat stick that wins. He's the kind of champion that you pick because you value his defensive utility as a proper tank, and then can transition him into all-out later in the fight, right? That's what I thought K'Sante would be. I did not think he would be just pick him, kill everybody. That was shocking. Right. So, K'Sante's win rate is low in lower levels of play. You need to be able to capitalize him properly, and then he's definitely more along the lines of a control champion if he's not just an overwhelming murder you stat stick. I would imagine that if you played around him as a carry and, like, actually had some tools to enable him, he's still going to be okay, like, even though he's squishier when all out, like, you just probably have to provide a little more for him and help him. He'll be, like, a little less self-sufficient if he's just forcing all outs, and I think that's completely fine, right? Again, I think K'Sante is a cool champion, and I do not think you should overreact to these changes whatsoever. It's just since the counterplay to him has developed and we know favorable matchups now, I think the era of blind pick K'Sante has probably ended. But please treat him as a completely reasonable, good champion who is a little bit devalued and platinum minus off of mechanical execution and his, like, defensive nature. Okay, Kassadin, who we just saw in the last patch, we saw a change that I predicted would not meaningfully affect his power, and it didn't. So, what's happening now? Yeah, Kassadin continues to cast a win. So now they're trying to hammer home their nerf from the previous patch. And if you remember, 13.1b targeted Kassadin's E at rank 5, reducing the cooldown by 4 seconds. This property mitigated some of the impact of the nerf, and then on top of that, at rank 1, they're reducing its damage, but it scales back up to the normal. So they're just trying to make Kassadin more vulnerable early, but this is his first max anyway, right? Riftwalk, base damage is down by 10 at all ranks, and the bonus damage per stack is also down by 5 at all ranks. Again, before we react too harshly to this, he is a champion who is very, very, very well supported by systems. And he's a champion who at lower levels of play is allowed to scale in inappropriate windows, even if he's not necessarily allowed to trade back as effectively as you think, right? He's losing between 10 to 30 damage per Riftwalk at level 6, at all ranks. I'm saying at level 16. No, he's losing between 10 to 30 damage on every Riftwalk. Okay. While I don't think that the damage reduction of Riftwalk is very significant for the point of the game where Kassadin would care too much about its damage, I don't think that this is significant at levels of play where Kassadin is just allowed to scale inappropriately and he doesn't need to trade back as much. I do think that these together, on top of this trying to hammer home the last nerf from the last patch, actually should make Kassadin, like, less of an omnipresent threat in drafts, and probably does expose, like, some more mage opportunities because he is not quite as scary. Because, like, whenever we have nerfs targeting 2 aspects or 2 or 3 aspects of a champion at once, those are usually nerfs that are power impacting. Like, we saw Aatrox's nerfs, we saw Orianna's buffs affecting multiple aspects of a champion all at once. I would imagine that Kassadin does become less of an omnipresent threat, although because he's so well supported systematically, I don't expect him to fully go away at all, right? Kayle. Okay. Before I dive into Kayle, let's figure out what happened to Kayle. Kayle got half of the durability update rolled back. Kayle did not get all of her durability update stats. And every champion who did not get all of their durability update stats, like Senna, Kayle, we saw them fall off in popularity and power, right? They just are noticeably squishier than everybody else. So basically, we had a state of Kayle like immediately on 12-10 where it's like, wow, this champion's broken as hell, right? This champion is absolutely broken. And mid lane was the safest place for her, but now this matters. Like, you know, top lane Kayle is just not as good because she's a lot more exposed. I think, like, the last time we saw her, her late game was reasonably strong, but her laning was really, really, really safe, and that was the problem. And then they made her laning not safe, and then because she is literally the worst champion in the game, in the early game, we just stopped valuing her highly, right? So they're giving her more scaling. Does that solve that mid lane problem? No. Does that solve, like, a top lane phase problems? No. Are tanks that Kayle can easily beat up, like, prominent in the meta right now? I mean, like, a little more than before, but still, no. So we have a DPS buff to a DPS champion, which we would typically not change our pick conditions for. And, you know, movement speed is a skill-expressive stat. That matters. I just cannot foresee any Kayle pick conditions changing, predominantly because I still do view her scaled state as worth it more than a lot of other people do. So I look at this set of changes and I'm just thoroughly whelmed, and I don't think we change anything with how we strategize around Kayle. I will add a little disclaimer here. The conversation that I just had with chat implies that I might have been overlooking something, because the Kayle players are saying you're level 6 Pyke with tier 2 boots. When you become ranged, this makes a greater difference in avoiding damage than I would think, and, like, apparently there is, like, some defensive breakpoint that this might hit, in which case, top lane Kayle would be shielded from some of her matchups. But my gut instinct still says we don't change our conditions too much, but this goes on the watch list. Kayn, Shadow Assassin damage increased, and the QAD scaling increased. So, yeah, I think both forms of Kayn are not amazing. What they are doing, they are increasing Kayn's Shadow Assassin bonus damage, up 5% at late levels. Okay, not bad at all. And the AD ratio of Reaping Slash is going up 15%, which doesn't affect Rost's damage, because he has separate Q values. So, this is a burst champion receiving big amounts of burst damage. Why do we have to consider this big amounts? Well, because this is percent bonus damage to, like, all of your damage, compounded by a 15% increase to a ratio. Now, in situations where Kayn cannot fully assassinate, he still maintains his niche of being, like, that poke assassin, just jumping into walls, harassing you with W, like, whittling you down. It is moderately long cooldown, but that's not changed. But we will have reason to believe that Kayn, Shadow Assassin, hits important burst breakpoints faster because, like, this appears to be a lot of damage, right? So let's say Kayn is level 11. So it's 8% bonus damage on a level 11 Kayn, plus 15% AD on Q. We are looking at, like, Kayn on a reasonable, like, non-snowballed, on-curve state in the game, right? So, obviously, when you're, like, giga-fucking snowballed, this buff is going to be, like, ridiculous. It's going to be a lot more damage than that. If you are on curve and you are even with the rest of the game, that 1 Q is dealing, like, an additional 23-ish damage to its primary targets, but then it's like, well, yeah, Kayn is not hitting just his Q, he's hitting his whole combo, and eventually, like, this whole thing impacts, like, the rest of his combo twice because he's probably ulting, right? The TLDR is this is well within our range of a change to a burst champion's damage that we view as significant. Now, the problem with Kayn is that you have to evolve him, and evolving him is hard and he's weak before you've evolved him. But at chaotic levels of play, like Platinum and below, probably even Diamond and below, to be honest, like any level of amateur play that isn't, like, locked down, solid, consistent, Kayn is good. Like, Kayn does evolve reasonably often. Poor LeBlanc. What a weirdo. Burst champion in a post-durability world, but at the same time, a weird poke champion, like a poke burst champion. who has like some utility that could be useful. To be useful, LeBlanc's like poke burst combo has to be high impact and she has to be able to get it off repeatedly. But like she's not threatening without a bunch of them right now. And their solution was greater access to early Mimic by 10 seconds. Lower mana cost on Q and some mana stuff. What do my cooldown notes say? A champion who does not cast their spells off CD will be less affected by a CD change. The following types of abilities are most impacted by cooldown or duration changes, provided that it represents a significant portion of the champion's output. Poke spells. Okay. Can absolutely be a poke spell. Core personal defenses, core DPS or HPS, in combat spammable mobility, that's less than 6 second cooldown, not this. Catch or protective utility, well, this is also catch. Window limiting ultimates on aggro champions, hey. And spells with ideal 100% uptime, hey. Okay, so a cooldown change on Mimic is good on paper. A 10-second at early ranks cooldown on Mimic, I guess it does make her laning more consistent, and her laning needs to be more consistent for her to get value as a champion, because she does need to generate a lead so that her pattern later can actually be threatening. This does, marginally affect her ability to find things in lane, and this is the type of spell that would be most impacted by a cooldown, but my guts, I know this isn't deep analysis, my gut still says this isn't good enough to create new LeBlanc pick conditions. Lee Sin, oh, terrible champion. They're making him less terrible. Okay. Despite appearances, since a typo has occurred and it's actually become a total AD ratio, Lee Sin's E has not lost any damage whatsoever. It has only gained damage. It has only gained damage because his base AD at level 1 compensates for this completely. So he's gaining plus 10% bonus AD on Q1. He's gaining up to plus 20% bonus AD on Q2. So for a maximum potential of plus 30% bonus AD here, if he's getting his items, right? Natural scaling increases the value of this ability still. It will just deal more damage. And the slow with skill point investment is going up. My only concern is that this damage does not come online early enough for Lee Sin's game plan to be helped a lot. Lee Sin is fundamentally an aggro champ, and you do have to try to generate leads with him, and you are getting, at most, 30 extra damage here, and then, we're just gonna, estimate, up to 60 bonus damage here, which is a big number, but that requires level 18. So what I actually start to think is that if anything is hugely impacted by these, it's solo lane Lee Sin. That's gaining the most damage, because it does mean that Lee Sin values levels more highly. And I know he just lost, ideal Ravenous Hydra, but it remains an option to help him lane. I would look into it. I would be a bit surprised if jungle Lee Sin became dramatically stronger from, this amount of damage. But I'm really curious to see what happens when we experiment with solo lane Lee Sin again. That's what I would say to that. Okay, so Trundle's becoming the best champion in the game because Trundle's dance speed now scales with his movement speed. That buff is way too powerful, too much psychological warfare. Trundle can't win. But on a serious note, I was lower on Trundle during Season 12 than most other people. I think while people were still playing him and saying he's really good, I wasn't feeling him. And I can now chalk that up to participating in Platinum Leagues, where Trundle thrives on the chaos and just is a better champion than he is in theory. So I think both existed at once. Theoretical Trundle wasn't that good, but in amateur leagues, Trundle was still thriving. That was until the last set of nerfs, where Subjugate got noticeably weaker, and a base attack speed reduction on a champion who relies on attack speed but doesn't build any attack speed is a big deal. And so You know, I thought Trundle's Frozen Domain nerf would be impactful on 12-17. Yeah, I even wrote, like, optimal WMAX builds hit with reduced uptime, and then I wrote a bunch about how I doubted myself. It's like, oh, well, Trundle was one of the few top tiers that hadn't been nerfed, so he is stronger than the rest, and I wasn't thinking about it, But, like, no, his uptime has been hit, his movement speed has been hit, his damage has been hit, his attack speed has been hit. But now they have slightly rolled back the Frozen Domain nerf. They're saying, Trundle, we're sorry, you can have some of your uptime back because we nerfed your W attack speed, your base attack speed so much. So the only conclusion that I can really draw that would be fair to Trundle is that I personally wouldn't read too much into this, even though I think this is a buff in the right direction to restoring some of his power. But because I am looking at this and saying, like, it's okay, it will probably have greater effects on, like, Platinum and below play than I am anticipating. Okay, Zach. Speaking of broken champions, there's a lot of them in the game right now. Zach's WAP ratio is going down 1% per 100 AP of target's maximum health, and he is losing 10% AP on Elastic Slingshot. This is intended to nerf Demonic Embrace. This is intended to nerf even harder the Demonic Embrace Rocket Belt shenanigans going on in mid lane. We can, because it's like we can simplify this into roughly a 1% DPS, 1% max HP DPS nerf. We can simplify it into that. Like, it's grossly oversimplified, and it's only on Demonic. When we see that is a DPS nerf that we have to think, like, okay, that matters. That matters. And then he's losing some burst damage too, right? And then on top of that, there's going to be a Radiant nerf coming up, which will impact Zach more than it will impact other champions, because it means Zach is getting less haste, which also does impact his DPS even further. Okay, that's a big deal. So, that does mean that it is likely that the, like, era of completely overpowered Zach has ended. But I want to point out that this isn't, like, all the damage isn't all of his output, right? Zach has plenty of CC to go around. He has a long CC chain. Even though his own personal damage is lower, he is still going to provide value to teams if you find, like... I mean, he's also just, like, a fundamentally incredible champion in specifically Platinum, right? He's always stronger than he should be in Platinum. So, you know, Zach being overpowered was a big issue. What I'm trying to say is that Zach has more output than his damage, and he will be noticeably worse at solo killing people. But I struggle to see in lower level amateur play a completely absent Zach. He is absolutely still doing plenty. And if you are an honest tank player, you know, just get a little more used to not fully one-shotting people, but your champion is still going to be at minimum, like, pretty good. Don't overreact to this, but you will feel it. Speaking of, we're immediately moving into Radiant Virtue. So, on the preseason patch, I predicted that this item would be broken, and everyone would buy it. And I was wrong, but only because Jack-Show was broken. And then when Jack-Show got nerfed, oh look, Radiant Virtue, here it is! It does so much! So what are they doing to Radiant Virtue? Plus 200 gold, fair, that's fine. They're trying to get it away from support champions. They're like, get rid of it on support role. 3,200 gold is an absolutely unacceptable amount of gold for a support to buy, to spend on one item, unless the item is, like, absolutely giga broken. And its components are not giving supports, like, a lot of insane power, so, like, they're like, please get it out of here. They're nerfing the cooldown to target, like, specifically Karma, and then they're giving you more HP if you have built HP. They're saying the more HP you have, the better this item will be. That's even more. There is no longer a healing amp passive, so it will just heal you the same amount, you and your allies, the same amount consistently. Each tick is worth the same. But it no longer grants any ability haste, and this was a lot of invisible power. This was very strong. Now, me personally, every time an item allows me to heal my allies while also doing my other jobs, like, I'm not going to stop building this item as like a selfless sort of tank player. Like that's the kind of player that I am, and I look at this and I still think like, yeah, the item's completely fine. It was just like giga broken before. And in fact, maybe we'll start to see like some of the initial preseason predictions coming true now, where Radiant Virtue becomes kind of a bad rush item. And it's not giving you a lot of value until you have greater HP, and you would much rather go like Anathemas into Radiant on a lot of champions. Yeah, so the few users who did rush this item won't be doing it anymore. And like the Demonic into Radiant users will still be able to build this item. It's just losing the haste is a big deal. Weaker healing on lower health targets is a big deal. And you know, some of the personal defenses, it's fine. Like, we're going to see this item still finding value as the game goes on. Totally fine. But like some of the abuse rush cases are gone. Stop building it on support. And we no longer have any overpowered tank mythics. So just like settle into proper standard tank itemization. Look for your good legendary rushes. And we will see a couple of tanks impacted in power. But as we explained during Zach, their output was not just this. This was just very strong. I am willing to reassess Even Shroud now, just because the situation has gotten dire. So yeah, we are a little bit concerned for melee support power too. Okay, Umbral Glaive. So, I personally have actually stopped buying this on a number of supports. Look, it feels oppressive in the right game state, but like in a solo queue perspective, in a low-level amateur perspective, Pyke finds a lot more value out of Prowler's Rush into Axiom. Senna finds a lot more value out of like just, I mean, there's IE Rush available to her now, which is really funny. There's just Eclipse Rush. Like, Umbral Glaive's stats are bad. The best user before, like, a while ago, was Graves, because it pivoted him into, like, an Umbral Eclipse, like, you know, it just got him going faster, and it was kind of funny that way. So Umbral Glaive losing power in its passive is a big deal. Minus 10 seconds on cooldown, fair, like, we're that makes sense, like, it does feel oppressive and horrible to deal with. Ranged users are not one-shotting wards anymore. I want Senna players to stop building this. Actually, the problem too is like the rise of they're definitely targeting this because of the rise of AD carry supports. This is shade at Ashe support. Yes, Ashe support is getting hit a little bit. The whole Caitlyn support, Kalista support, like that whole lethality thing is trying to target them. And unlike Senna, Kalista support doesn't have, like, early Eclipse options. That doesn't sound very compelling for her. Now, are these champions fully going away? No, I absolutely wouldn't say so. Ranged users of, like, standard lethality devalue their mythics in current state unless they're Eclipse users. When ranged lethality users devalue their mythics, they start to look at, like, okay, what is the best legendary I can get my hands on? For farming champions, that would unironically, and I hate to say this because I don't think the items are outstanding, it is unironically Yumu's versus Axiom. Like, that's your conversation to have. That's why Varus is rushing Yumu's in pro play right now. Because the Umbral Glaive stats stunt you on farming income. The supports, who don't have better options, are not saving up for Axiom. They're not saving up for Yumu's. They are getting this Umbral. Just building whatever is cheap. Yeah, they're just building whatever's cheap. And so is the passive being weaker going to really feel awful for those champions? No, I don't think so. It just makes this more fair to play against. Because why should Kalista support just choke you out completely in terms of vision? It does weaken those strategies a little bit, but because all of those strategies are based around lane dominance and snowballing it out, like, you can have normal human vision control and you'll be fine, and, like, it's not that big a deal. And Overheal was intended to ship, actually it says right here, I watched the Freak video, he wanted it in 12.1b, or sorry, Freak wanted this in 13.1b to supplement the mana changes that they made to unbind people from Presence of Mind, and obviously it didn't work because Overheal wasn't any good. So it now does not scale off your maximum health. It's now 20 to 300 based on champion level, Overheal. This is a buff from level 5 onwards. Okay, if you have a healing support, let's now investigate what happened with mana changes last patch. Let's see if Presence of Mind is not as essential. Let's see if we're allowed to run this when we have a healing enchanter. Let's see if we're really getting a lot of value from this as a Bloodthirster rusher. Now, the problem that I come up with is that the best Bloodthirster rushers are Misfortune and Draven, who both get very mana-limited and would value presence, but, you know, it gets muddy there. But melee fighters still gain a lot of value from Triumph. Ranged champions, I mean, yeah, it's like, I would not be surprised if this was just a really good, like, break glass in case of emergency, or, like, perfect conditions for it rune. We just need to... I am not confident making a prediction about this until I really have a chance to sit down and, like, fully assess non-presence of mind laning, because there was no reason to even try assessing it last patch, right? I will say, it looks appealing. This is big! This is the big one. This is the big one. Melee support adjustments. So the pro meta is more than 20-1. Why are melee supports gone? What happened to them? I did a study on like 12-12 or something like that because I wanted to figure out what's going on. What I concluded is that engaged champions need a certain amount of damage to justify their existence. Otherwise, all they do is exert pressure on their teammates to have like immediate and overwhelming follow-up. If you are playing Leona, you need a certain amount of damage for your engaged to like really have threats. Otherwise, you're just kind of a sitting duck, right? Otherwise, like your only output is CC, which is valuable, but your teammates have to do a lot more heavy lifting. If you are an engaged champion who does no damage, you say to your teammates, compensate fully for my lack of damage, or I will die. And having that I will die is very bad. The lack of damage stemmed from 12-10. The engaged supports lost a lot of damage. It became harder to all-in somebody. And so, like, also, like, there's compounding things, too. Like, Spell Thieves is really, really good. On 12-14, the meta was supposed to trend towards mage supports because I believe that Dragon aggro became the best way to play the game, and that didn't fully catch on. And I do think it's starting to actually catch on now with, like, the whole marksman support thing. But that is a theory topic, and this is a show about amateur play, right? In reality, melee supports have been completely okay in amateur play. But they've been really easy to deal with because there's so many good counter picks to engage supports who are not doing enough damage, and their threat is lower, and, like, where mistakes are high, their threat is high. So they've been fine, but even in, like, platinum level, they've only been, at best, fine. The approach that they seem to be taking is not to give back their damage. It's to make them more capable of playing out multiple sequences. The approach seems to be make supports better at laning so that even though they are not dealing as much damage as they used to, and they shouldn't, it is more likely that the carry behind them is more snowballed. And so the threat that they're exerting on their own team isn't as big a deal. I also want to just point out that, like, Rel was kind of an exception to that, where it's not like you need to do all of the damage, because Rel had an alternate way to keep herself alive and buy time for her teammates in the form of a lot of healing with Enchanter itemization. Amateur has more melee support due to Western players generally being worse at range. I agree. Like, we're also just kind of bad, and we can't play ranged very well. So the consequences is that a class that is objectively very, very, very weak in theoretical play was already reasonably okay in amateur, right? And now they're getting deserved, necessary buffs, which may have implications over a level of play where these were already okay, and where we as players are just worse at piloting the ranged supports to an advantage. So although I am going to scrutinize these changes very heavily, I want you to note that when I say a champion is probably not going to be significantly buffed off some of these changes, that they're still better in amateur than they are in theory. Alistar is gaining a 5% max health self-heal, and he's granting 6% of his max health to allies. So that is intending to make Alistar more poke resistant, which is a big deal. Let's assume the absolute worst case. I'm a level 5 Alistar. I'm rounding down. I'm being completely not generous to Alistar whatsoever. I have 1000 HP. Okay? I'm healing myself for 50 almost every wave, and I'm healing my AD carry for 60 almost every wave. And that is not generous. He's actually healing for more. Well, the mana costs are going down on his spells, and the AP ratios are going up, and he's becoming more poke resistant. So the intention is very clearly to allow Alistar to survive some difficult phases of his lane, and take multiple trades. How you'll find multiple trades as such a short-range champion is beyond me, but people make mistakes. These ratios are 100% high enough to justify Darkseal every game, for the record. If you find an Alistar angle, by all means take it. I am just struggling to imagine this alone creating a lot of new Alistar angles. Braum. Target immunity is now syncing up with his ultimate levels and is making it more intuitive, and it comes online sooner at a regular time where supports are expected to hit. Cool. That's actually not bad. That's not bad. 2-second cooldown, so Braum is allowed to fight back against poke a little more. And the whoa, okay. Now this is his last max, so we are realistically reading this as plus 10 bonus armor and magic resist. Supports like their durability steroids, and Braum, the worst champion in the game at dealing with range, is getting some slightly better tools at dealing with range. Is he going to be good at dealing with range? Hell no, this isn't doing anything against poke. This is actually just making him more oppressive in his melee matchups. Nautilus. Without reading what's happening, if Nautilus gets durability, that's a big deal for him. He is getting, Nautilus needed damage, cool. He kind of did. Despite how it's written here, Nautilus got durability. He got an increase to his W. He got an increase to his shield strength. And this is a champion. It's plus 10 at all ranks. And it's plus 10 at all ranks doesn't make it super... No, plus 10 at all ranks. Plus 10 at all ranks, greater cooldown, and something that you would value at high uptime in a long lane phase. Kind of cool. And then the magic damage is going up by 20 at rank 5. And the AP ratio is going up by 20%. Okay, so... Okay, Nautilus doesn't become, hugely more poke resistant. Okay, sorry. The cooldown does make Nautilus more poke resistant in lane, and that's a big deal. Especially since Nautilus should on paper be one of the best champions at dealing with all of the poke supports by just having the greatest threat on them. So I would look at this and say, neat, but for Platinum, pick conditions unchanged, and for Theory, I'm not sold that this makes him much better. I think it's also very tame. This is the interesting one, though, because how soon does this hit a wave clear breakpoint, and what does that mean for Nautilus mid? That's actually where I want to investigate the most. Okay, Pyke is getting a raw damage increase. Oh! Pyke doesn't feel like garbage after level 9 when none of his spells are worth leveling. Nice. Pyke is gaining plus 40 damage at rank 5 on a burst champion, which is significant, especially since Pyke is capable for fishing for his windows, and Pyke's combo is dangerous. That's a big deal. If I remember correctly, I did rate Pyke as one of the better melee supports in current state because I was so low on tanks. And nice, cool, damage for Pyke. Awesome, that does make him more threatening. Rakan is gaining a shorter cooldown on Q, a cheaper mana cost, beautiful, a greater base heal, a significantly greater base heal at high levels. That's a much bigger base heal at high levels. That's almost, that's plus 95 at level 18. And granted, we're not getting to level 18, but plus 95 has ripple effects throughout the rest of the scaling. And then just for some reason, he needs more AP ratios. Okay, so I think Rakan is good on paper, but is not supported by systems right now. I genuinely think Rakan is an excellent champion who doesn't have items. Because what's he going to do from support role? First of all, I'm genuinely at the point where I'm rushing Medjais on Rakan. I've been there for a while ever since Zanya's got nerfed on him. I don't like playing tank Rakan because remember, AP is his core stat because it translates not only to damage, but to durability and to utility. That's a big deal. But, like, what do? You have 3,000 gold Zhonya's. Rocket Belt is too expensive for you. Everfrost sucks. Like, Rocket Belt would be the perfect item if he could justify that. The TLDR is Rakan's been on my watch list as a good champion. So I struggle to view this as, like, big. Don't get me wrong. This healing change, the second the meta shifts back towards melee supports more, the second Rakan gets items that are perfect for him, he's broken. I genuinely believe that. The second Rakan gets supported by the systems in the game, this champ's broken, and we will see nerfs. But he's very unsupported right now. Yeah, you know what? I'm actually willing to give Rakan the benefit of the doubt on this one and say that, like, maybe more pick conditions into range champions come from this one. Like, I'm actually kind of feeling this one. Thresh. Magic damage. The AP ratio is increasing by 30%, which is interpreted as 0.8 damage per soul. The shield per soul... Alright, that was the best property of Thresh, the big fat W max. They forgot to actually write the 60% AP ratio. Okay, every time Thresh gets damage increases, I say, good, that is the right direction for Thresh, and that makes him closer to a champion who is, like, capable of skirmishing with stuff, but, like, it's all scaling value, and then they nerfed his W. I don't think Thresh can lane. His damage is so low, he can't function into the, like... He's getting a plus 20 increase on, like, a burst champion, we'll consider. That's well below our threshold of, like, this matters. And so, I don't care. Okay, Tenacity. Okay, so now we actually have to look at Legend Tenacity again. Legend Tenacity got nerfed. They are trying to severely nerf Tenacity. I will point out, I think Everfrost is weak, but the worse Tenacity gets, the better Everfrost becomes again. And then maybe we start to look at Veigar again, and maybe that champion stops being complete trash. And then maybe we look at, like, Everfrost Rakan, and we have an angle. Like, so Tenacity sources within the same group will stack multiplicatively with each other, which is net weaker together. So everything that you can actually buy or opt into from runes or items now stacks multiplicatively. The extra value you're getting is going to be Silvermere Dawn active to try to make this a bit more appealing. Regular Cleanse, which is supposed to be high value, and then modes buffs. And then the Group C, which is going to stack additively, is just the stuff that is explicitly a part of your kit. The tangible effect with the time that I have available is just impossible to fully predict. So what instead we should do is just start keeping an ear open for some whisperings. It's like, okay, is Everfrost any better? Are some of our stun-reliant tanks a little better? Like, are we actually starting to observe a rise in win rate, like a performance feeling better, Alacrity feeling better than Tenacity, Overgrowth feeling better than Unflinching? Like, just keep your ear to the ground, because it would be really foolish to overreact to Tenacity decreases before we have a chance to gain practical experience. So don't make any drastic changes to anything yet. Just put it on the watch list. Start looking for answers to those questions that I just posed. Jungle adjustments. Okay, so in current state, it is apparently I've been definitely starting to observe this, watching, like, LCK and stuff, playing my own games, and, like, feeling like, why are my team, I've been jungling this season, and my team has been pushing me to play more aggressively, and I keep, like, just experiencing some weird things. I'm like, why are my plays working? This doesn't make sense. I've been a power farmer historically. Like, I don't know why the people I'm playing against are making these mistakes when, like, dying to these things, and why I'm being rewarded for spam ganking so hard. And the answer was, like, treats were kind of insane, right? So, what have we got? Gold per treat is going down by 10. So, I mean, if you get yourself into a position where you've spam ganked and, like, you accumulated 3 treats, you are losing 30 gold, right? I've seen those situations happen. You just take one camp, you get an extra 30 gold. Experience for clearing a jungle camp has been increased by 5 experience per camp. You need X 180 experience to get to level X. Plus 30 on a full? I don't know. Okay. This is big. Trinkets available 1 wave sooner? That's big. That's a big deal. Jungle Companion. Oh, we've seen the clips. We've all seen the clips. We've seen the clips of this happening. Oh, okay. The junglers that are spam ganking do not care about their econ. The only one who does care about their econ is like Elise and to a degree Vi and Wukong, who actually do need to get to their 2 items if possible. Like, it would be nice for Vi to actually hit her tank item after Cleaver. Cleaver's expensive. It would be nice for Wukong to hit like a GA or something, right? This turret damage change is just not decipherable because they've made too many typos. This change, I think the champions that are spam ganking are just like fine being on lower econ, and so it's not that big a deal to them. And actually, it kind of it does kind of harm some of the champions that are power farming too, because it's just minus gold in everything. I don't think this makes like a big difference. I don't think that's like huge, because it's plus 30 per full clear. So it's like at worst, the enemy jungler is getting a 15 XP lead on you if you clear half a quadrant. If you clear a quadrant and they clear a full jungle, right? And this is just funny. So the only change that actually I would predict to have very high impact is this one. I think this is a big deal. I think wards available a wave sooner is huge. I think that's actually major for deterring early ganks. You can just put up more wards, and then you have to spend more sweeps to like actually deal with it. Which, funnily enough, I think impacts top lane more, and that's not the place that we were actually ganking, because the counterplay to this is just get your support on an early sweeper, and then sweep again, and then the early ganks are more consistent again, and, you know? So it's actually the top laners who were not getting spam ganked who are harder to spam gank. We probably will see like a small shift at top level, but did any of these specific timings matter to you in the first place as an amateur player? And the answer is probably no. So we only care about this one, and if you're trying to play around bot lane and also mid lane, it will simply be harder to find a hole in their vision because it's going to be easier for the laners to ward. Fortunately, platinum laners are clueless about where the jungler is, so you can probably still find some stuff, right? That is the patch. It will be impactful to the game, especially with this guy showing up. It will be impactful to the game, but I don't want you to overreact to any individual change here, because I don't think any individual change throughout the entire patch is worth overreacting to.